Sweet. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. This is one of our SciComm webinars that Lifeology is putting on once a month. We're trying to put on webinars to bring science communication topics to you, often on topics related to our SciComm program. My name is Paige Jarrow, and I'm our VP of Science Communication here at Lifeomic. And I'm the co-founder, along with Dorian Alguera, of Lifeology. I'm just going to share my screen and talk to you a little bit about Lifeology. In the meantime, keep posting in the chat where you're from. And if you have any questions for the panelists that are burning, you can post those there and we'll get to them as we go through this webinar. So just as a reminder, this webinar is about style in science communication. I'm really excited for the presenters we have today. I'll just actually introduce them really quick. So we have Jordan Calvert, who is an illustrator, and I'll let him introduce himself more in a second. But he has illustrated several Lifeology courses, including this one on style and science communication that if you haven't seen, I'll post in the chat in a second. That's the topic of this webinar. And then we also have the great Massimiliano Bucci, who is a professor of science communication in Italy and has, an illustrious career and publishing record. I'll let Massi and Jordan introduce themselves a bit more if they'd like with their bios. So maybe Jordan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So like Paige said, I'm an illustrator. I specialize particularly in the medium of comics. That's both my research and art interest. And with a particular focus on science communication. So how and in what ways comics can and illustration more broadly can be used to talk about science, to tell scientific stories, and to bring science into culture as part of an art form, really. My subject interests kind of within that field are kind of about weird beliefs. So I love things like UFOs, the paranormal, cryptozoology, these sorts of things that people are fascinated in, the psychology behind that, and in some cases the biology behind that. Nature, ecology, environmentalism, and zoology more broadly, and religion, because I sort of have a personal background in that, which has kind of led me to the career path that I have in a way, and wanting to think about how science can be miscommunicated and using that to talk about science in a different way. So that's me. And I live in Bristol right now, but if you're wondering about my accent, I am originally from Canada. So I'm a Canadian in England for about the past 11 or 12 years now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. And Massi, do you want to introduce yourself anymore?
Yes. My background is in the sociology and history of science, and I'm a social scientist studying the relationship between science and society and science communication. And also as a writer, I try to contribute across different media to science communication and the discussion about science in society in television, TV programs, op-ed in newspapers, and I really enjoyed this new experience of flashcard courses that we're going to talk about today.
Sweet. So I'm just going to talk about Lifeology just briefly, so that if you aren't aware, Lifeology is a platform that combines science and art in the form of what we call flashcard courses. It's a nice platform, technology platform to learn about science and health in very kind of bite-sized ways. But a key component of creating those courses for us is collaboration that we try to facilitate through the Lifeology community. So you might be part of the community, maybe you've joined the lifeology.io member directory, or you're in our Slack workspace. So we're big proponents of having people that are creating Lifeology courses with us, whether they're clients or people coming to create their own courses, to collaborate with professional artists and storytellers to make that science, their science communication better. So we're really trying to grow a diverse community of creators in order to bring more inclusiveness and cultural relevance to science communication in the form of Lifeology courses. Just as a, in case you aren't aware of our SciComm program, we have a kind of a little series of lifeology courses around science communication that Jordan and Masi have been helping with, including a lifeology course on the style of science communication. I'll post a link once I stop sharing my screen into the chat. But if you aren't aware, it's a free program. You can go to our website now at lifeology.io and find the SciComm tab and browse a number of courses on science communication topics there. And we try to release one every month, a new one every month. Awesome. So that's it for me. And then I will let Jordan get started going through this webinar. Again, if you have any questions as we're going, drop them into the chat and we'll try to get to them. We'll leave plenty of room, time for Q&A.
So I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but hopefully you can see me for the time being. So I thought we would start things off with a brief visual provocation to get us thinking about style and the different implications and the myriad ways style can be used and the contexts that can create. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm looking at. Right now, hopefully everyone can see, it's just a screen of my browser I've looked up DNA. And can everyone see that? Paige, could you nod if you can see the DNA? Okay, cool. So just type in DNA to any browser, you're going to see, just a cascade of actually pretty visually similar images. It's this kind of, funny enough, mainly blue kind of sci-fi looking molecule there. But looking particularly, that's my daughter. Here's an illustration that I made of the DNA molecule, trying to kind of look at the complexity of what's going on inside the cell there and how crammed the DNA is, but in a very simplified, stylized way.
Oh, Jordan, we're still seeing I'm still seeing just the DNA, like Google search.
Oh, okay. Let me change that then. How's that? What are you seeing now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Let me just change that. Can you see a purple DNA molecule there?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, sorry about that glitch there. So here's a stylized portrayal of DNA that I created. Here's a cartoon version of the DNA molecule, which is very simplified with sort of classic cartoon style. Or rather a slightly more molecular scientific based, but still very stylized rendering of the DNA molecule from a wonderful series of YouTube animations called Stated Clearly. Even the very scientific and technical rendering of the DNA molecule, as we see here, is a stylistic interpretation of the natural world, broken down into a few almost artistic renderings of sort of minimalist mid-century artwork. It could look like that being on the wall. So those are just different ways of rendering the DNA molecule. What about different forms of artistic style in general? The artists I'm going to show you all have very different subject matter in mind, but almost not so different as their styles. So of course we have Andy Warhol's pop art style. We've got the surrealist stylings of Salvador Dali, the impressionistic or post-impressionistic paintings of Van Gogh or Van Gogh in the UK, and the abstract artwork of Kandinsky, who's perhaps the father of abstract art. I can't imagine really different art styles, almost more in sort of this range. They're all colorful. They do have certain similarities, but we had a particular card in the Lifeology course that we made, which was a fun challenge, which is essentially to render these different stylistic portrayals of the DNA molecule. So not only are they sharing the same subject matter here, but they're in the styles of these different artists that I just showed you. In fact, the examples were sort of the inspiration for these. And then layered on top of that, not only am I trying to show different ways of showing the DNA molecules with different artistic styles, but also filtering that through another layer, which is my own artistic style with simple line drawings and a limited color palette, which was particularly important for the style we were going for in this lithology course. So this card, you can ignore the 3 in the middle. It's just part of the narrative kind of points we're wrapping up at the end of the course that I encourage you to read afterwards. But I hope that that's a little useful prompt to see how different not only something in science can be used in the form of textbook illustrations and so on, but the artistic style, and then filtered through my own kind of stylistic renderings as well, to think about just how broad this can be. And I'll leave it there and hand over to Masi for the time being.
Thank you, Jordan. Actually, if I may share my screen, the example you used, it's a very good example, because the original image of the double helix in the 1953 Watson and Crick paper in Nature was actually drawn by an artist, Odile Speed. She was an artist and designer and the wife of Francis Crick. And Crick made a simple sketch, and then she made this drawing. So this one of the icons of contemporary science that all of us associate with life sciences was created by an artist, and this is not the only case, and this is a good hint. I think it's a good start to think about style. But let me give a little bit of background of why we should care about style with regard to science communication, because most of us are used to associate style with, I suppose, with art or with fashion. So let me say a few words about how could the notion of style be useful in something we today many of us are concerned or often discussing about, which is the topic of quality in science communication. I would say during the past decade or a couple of decades, the landscape of science communication has changed significantly, and not just because of the diffusion of social media, but also, for example, because the public engagement turn, or the third mission push, as it is called sometimes, meaning the fact that research institutions, for a number of reasons, are more and more active, and scientists themselves are more and more active in what we could call a direct-to-consumer science communication. So, for example, through social media platforms, but also, as we have seen, for example, during this pandemic on television, for example, the traditional mediation of journalists or traditional mediators, like professional science communicators, is sort of bypassed, and we have access to an unprecedented variety of material which is produced directly for public consumption by research institutions and scientists. And these, of course, has a number of consequences for us. As I said, we have obviously a greater choice and opportunities, but also the question of quality is more complex. We used to solve the question of quality traditionally in science communication by appealing to the brand, to the quality of the channel itself. So if something was on the BBC, was in a science museum, was in the New York Times, by definition, it should have been something interesting and credible and trustworthy, and something worth of our attention. Now, of course, we have to navigate in a much more complex landscape, and let me say also that the so-called fake news it's often a misleading simplification of a very of a broader problem, which is the problem of quality. So how do we assess quality? This is the key question, not just for us as users of science communication, but also, for example, for institutions, funding agencies, and research institutions themselves. So that is the general question. And one of the aspects of this, I'm using the beautiful images that Jordan made for this course, is that we're more and more led into what Robert King Merton, a great sociologist and the founder of sociology of science, called the Matthew effect, from the Gospel of Matthew, which says, those who have will have more and more, and those who have less will have less and less. A very sad passage of the Matthew Gospel at the end of the parable of talent, which means basically that particularly in the age of social media, but this is something, of course, that also for traditional media worked to a large extent, we often overlap the judgment of quality with the visibility of those who communicate. The typical example is a Nobel laureate or a famous scientist. We often make this equation. It was said by somebody who's famous in science, then it must be high quality, or at least it must be scientific. Some years ago, the magazine New Scientist compiled a long list of quotations attributed to Einstein that Einstein never said, including the famous one on bees, that when bees will disappear, humanity will be at risk of extinction. Einstein said a number of things, but not that quote, nor other quotes that are often circulated through social media. But why do people do that? Of course, because if Einstein has said something, then of course this has a different weight. This is the weight of the Matthew effect. So we started this course by looking back at original examples of style, and style is of course there is a style in science and science communication. But of course, style is a term, is a concept that connects quality across media and across fields. And both Robert Hooke and Galileo are very interesting examples of this ability of connecting different words and different activities to their own style and to their own way of presenting, describing, and actually drawing things. Robert Hooke was the curator of experiments at the Royal Society. So we're talking about the very beginnings of modern science. The Royal Society was one of the early science academies. And on the occasion of a visit of the king, who was curious to see this new thing called, which was not called science, of course, at the time, because scientist is a much more recent, early 19th century term. Of course, the king couldn't be asked to sit with the fellows of the Royal Society and look into the microscope. So Robert Hooke was commissioned an exquisite book of drawings to present to the king. But when he finished it, it was so beautiful that it didn't look scientific enough for the other fellows of the Royal Society. So it looked too artistic. So Robert Hooke had to print it by himself, basically. And it was a huge success. It was a bestseller. It's a book only of about 60 fine illustrations, mostly at the microscope. And Samuel Pepys, writer and politician, declared it the most ingenious book I'd ever seen. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. And similarly, when Galileo looked at the moon, at Saturn and Jupiter with his own telescope in 1609, 1610, according to Marjorie Nicholson, that was the beginning of modern world, because a new era opened to our eyes. But again, interestingly, the reason why Galileo was able to understand, for example, that the moon is not smooth, as the dogma assumed, that everything in heavens should be smooth and spherically perfect, was exactly through his style, his mastering the art of chiaroscuro. Galileo was a student of drawing. He knew how to recognize the shades and light as an indicator of the fact that the moon was not smooth, but was actually full of cavities. And his own representation immediately influenced artists like Domenico Cigoli, which you see in the small image, which is a beautiful fresco in the Santa Maria Maggiore chapel in Rome, where the Virgin Mary is holding her feet on a moon that is exactly as Galileo for the first time had described just a year before. So again, style is one of the ways in which we can address, in a non-normative way, of course, in a non-formal way, the issue of quality. And for example, invites us to recognize the fact that there is not just one way, there is not the one-size-fits-all solution for science communication, for the most effective science communication. What does it mean? It doesn't mean much. Of course, science communication has to be sensitive and have intelligence of the context, of the audience, of the cultures, different cultural contexts in which it is played. And also the fact that style and in general quality has to do with several dimensions, not just accuracy. Of course, accuracy. This is one of the reasons why I say the discussion about fake news is very limited and partly misleading. Accuracy is clearly one of the dimensions of quality, but is not the only one. And style, for example, helps us recognize beauty. Beauty is a very, and the quality of representation, it's a very important element for scientists themselves. When going back to the double helix example, when Watson and Crick presented it, somebody commented, it was too beautiful not to be true. That model, it was so simple and elegant, and that's often a criterion for scientists. Then, of course, there is openness, for example, openness to dialogue, openness about the idea that science communication is not just about talking or lecturing, but also about listening, knowledge of context and audiences, and also ability to inspire questions and social conversations, which is another important element of style. So to conclude, one of the reasons for studying style in science communication is that helps us recognize the fact that science communication is not a technical fix. It's not a button that you press or push for obtaining certain desired attitudes or behavior in the population, but is an integral part of culture. And as such, of course, it can contribute to education, awareness, responsible behavior, but also it can contribute to enjoyment, pleasure, and entertainment, as we hope this little course will do for those who will take it. So I will stop here, and maybe we can, Jordan, we can say a few words about our collaboration.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. I guess where should we start? By way of the way we got put together, I think, was Paige had approached you to write the course, and then you brought me on to do the illustrations, and we went about creating the script for this in a slightly different way. I've since realized, because this was my first Lifeology course, and I've done a couple, I think 2 others since. And rather than start with sort of a set script that was broken down into all of the separate flashcards, which I think usually have 1, maybe at most 2 sentences kind of per illustration, Masi and I, we started to, it was a bit more iterative. You created an overall kind of general script for everything that you wanted to say. And then I broke that up into what I saw as visual kind of components. So if I saw something that could be represented symbolically or just struck as a very clear and powerful visual, I'd sort of isolated that out into a card, and then Paige kind of worked with us back and forth to polish each one of those cards, because a lot of times they're too long. Overall, the course, I think we started with something like 60 cards or something like that, and we got it down to just over 30, if I remember correctly. So it was really, from my perspective, very rewarding and quite fun, because sometimes we could almost cut a sentence or 2 out, because if I'm just drawing that, then following the show don't tell principle, which I try and employ as much as possible in comics, rather than have a character say something that they're doing, you can just show them doing that, or you can show an image within an image, and then it kind of avoids having to explain it as well and have text and image beside each other. Because if the adage is true that a picture is worth 1,000 words, you've saved a lot in the word count, just the image you're showing. And then sometimes it would modify the text a little bit. If I drew something, I think then we could adjust the text a little bit, but you may want to add some more as well from your perspective. But that was what it was like as an artist. It was quite cool.
Yes, for me also was a new something completely new. I have to say honestly, I didn't know about flashcards before Paige contacted me, but I immediately thought about Jordan, because I had seen some of his comics about science, and so instinctively I thought it would have been nice to work with him, and I was right, because it was really rewarding and fruitful experience. As Jordan said, I came up with the draft, and he developed it into a full storyboard. And then probably the most difficult but instructive part started. There was a long process of fine tuning and adjustments, and I really think we should acknowledge Paige's input and an invitation to sharpen and clarify each card to make it easily understandable and usable. And as far as I can tell, I think the feedback, maybe Paige, you want to say something about this, but the feedback from the users was quite good, and I really hope we can do another one sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's this whole process, I think it's fantastic, because it kind of, in this case, we were creating a course about science communication and about style and science communication, but kind of following, the process that you would, use to visualize, to communicate science and style, to do the same thing on this course about style. And the Lifeology courses are always, we try to go through many processes of having different reviewers and readers look at the courses and kind of interpret it. It takes quite a long time to narrow, to condense the text. It's sort of that thing of like, if you ask me to create, an hour-long presentation, it'll take me, not very long. If you ask me to create a 5-minute presentation, it's going to take me maybe 10 times longer. It's the same for these Lifeology courses in terms of like trying to create a really succinct, and in a very succinct amount of text and space to provide a message that not only is, provides insight into the style of science communication, but also allows people to explore it in a different way, I think is one of the powers of it, and to like kind of see it for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely very meta. The early stages when I was coming up with what style to use, and that being sort of hyper aware that it was about style and beauty and science communication. And I'm like, okay, what style shall I draw this in, and so on. I think we landed on a style that I've used for the rest of my Lifeology illustrations afterward as well, because I was kind of quite pleased with the outcome. But yeah, and then the other aspect, it's not directly addressed in the text, but even just the creative ways of talking about the text through visual metaphor and that kind of thing is a style in and of itself. Using metaphor, particularly in visual art, but obviously also you can do that sort of just verbal explanations can be great metaphors. Some of the best sort of scientific explanations that bring a lot of clarity are told kind of almost through parables in that long tradition, and you doing so visually with a format like this, the flashcards, in a way it's very similar to comics, where you have the text accompanying the image, and you can do two things at once. You don't just have to replicate what the text is saying and draw it literally. You can use that opportunity to let the text say what the text is saying, and in a stylistic, it gives you a little more freedom in a stylistic way, portray a different aspect or a different view or a creative outlook of what the text is talking about in a visual metaphor in the image. So that's quite liberating in a sense.
Awesome. Masi, did you have anything else to add, or did you want to open up to Q&A?
No, I think we could take the questions from the participants if someone has one.
Yeah, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I can start to just throw some questions to the panelists, but I mean, Jordan and Masi, I'm curious, how, like, what outcomes for the Lifeology course you were hoping for people in terms of, something that you were hoping they might see that you put intention into the flashcard course, or something that something that people can take away in terms of like going out into the real world and practicing this, or seeing, recognizing style when they see it. Kind of like, what were some practical takeaways you were hoping people would get?
Masi, do you want to take that?
Yes. I think for me, the best thing would be if viewers would take this as a starting point, then to read something about science communication, or to explore something more about science communication. So I think that was the idea, that these flashcards work as a sort of a teaser for other types of content. But I also appreciate the fact that looking at the whole catalog of courses of Lifeology, it would also be interesting to see how people go from one course to another, and put this together. I think we had some questions, some sort of exercises, right, together with the course activities.
Yeah, we did. So yeah, at the end of each one of these SciComm courses, we have a little activity. We're planning in the new year to start thinking about, putting those together into a certificate for people, but they're there so that you can kind of put what you've learned. It's a very condensed course. It only takes really a couple of minutes to go through. And so we put some activities at the end that people can engage with if you want to kind of practice and put your learning into action.
Yeah. I think, for example.
Oh, sorry, Masi, you go.
No. I think at the end, we came up with three proposed conclusions. Then one was that science communication is not just about providing accurate information. As I said, it is about culture. It is about enjoyment. The other thing is that quality in science communication has several dimensions. And the third one is recognize style, and different types of styles helps us recognize the multiple dimensions of quality in science communication.
Yeah, and I think that first point was particularly important to me for this project, but then also just in general, the idea of style and aesthetic beauty, frankly, being it can be an intrinsic part of science. And throughout the history of science and science communication, visual and creative representation of science has been kind of fundamental to not just talking about the science for an educational purpose, but as a cultural output in and of itself. So thinking of science in and as culture. But for me as a visual artist, thinking about science as a creative ground for exploration in an artistic way. So science in and as an art form, really, and as art. We literally portrayed that in the course. I'm just going to share my screen again. Hopefully I do this correctly this time. As an art gallery with these different kind of representations of masterpieces of science, kind of, we coined it. A lot of, almost to the point of cliche, a lot of them. And it was sort of fun to think of examples here. Some of them are actually problematic in a way. For example, the quote unquote March of Progress image representing evolution. This can be picked apart in terms of the way it can miscommunicate science, but nevertheless, it exists as a cultural artifact. It's a meme, basically, originating in the 1960s. And another example for me, is the Voyager golden record, which we include as one of the slides. Here we have a character sitting back and listening to the Voyager golden record as a leisure activity. And for those who are unfamiliar, the golden record was an actual I was going to say vinyl, but it was actually pressed in gold, so it's not strictly vinyl, but encoded on there are sounds representing the various cultural and historical music and soundscapes of Earth, and then also imagery. And I have a beautiful replica of this, a 2-disc set that I just have. It's one of my prized possessions, and to me, it is the Voyager record. This is placed on the Voyager space probe, which is now the furthest human-made object, speeding away from our solar system. The ultimate goal, or at least an exercise in thought, is what if this vessel were to be intercepted by other intelligences outside our solar system? Let's leave something for them to kind of puzzle over and understand something about us. So this is part of a NASA initiative. Is this science? Is it art? Is it both? I think clearly it's definitely both, and it represents kind of a high form of what science and art together can kind of accomplish. It blurs the boundaries easily, where I think some heavy science, hard science can look at it skeptically or cynically and think that isn't science. Even Carl Sagan's famous pale blue dot photograph, he convinced the JPL folks to turn Voyager around and take a picture of this scientifically insignificant image of the Earth as a tiny pixel at that distance, but it had kind of resounding cultural and philosophical impacts. Really, here is a photograph of that. What is an unremarkable artistic photograph, I think, does speak to us and gets people involved in the scientific and human implications of the space research, basically. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Yeah, it makes you just think about, that, artistic rendering of science, just its ability to really inspire people and bring science into, a world that they can, interact with and feel like they're a part of. We do have some questions that came in. I think this is related. I'll answer all of them, but one that might be kind of maybe a simple answer right now is that, do you agree that like poor quality science communication, like misinformation, could it be recognized as bad style? Yeah. Or is it a thing of no style or bad style? Can we recognize
I don't want to
bad
use
science
any
communication?
examples like to call anyone out, but there are. Maybe it's a disappointing answer, but I would say, like, in a sense, unless it's actual misinformation or bad information and it's misleading, it's not accurately representing the science. There is a subjectivity level to all of this stuff where if you think something is a bad style and it might not be your cup of tea, and maybe it's your field of research and it's irritating the way that was drawn, or the sound, they put the wrong sound in the video or whatever, that might be the very catalyst that gets a viewer or someone reading that comic or listening to that piece of music interested in science, right? So I think it's too simplistic to say that something that maybe just isn't stylistically your cup of tea is of bad quality. That being said, there definitely are examples of that, but I'm sort of reluctant to publicly say out anyone in that respect. But yeah, I'm not sure. What do you think?
I would agree with Jordan and the person who posed the question that in my view, as I mentioned, the question of bad quality or not so good quality has always to be judged in a context. So, for example, the actual content of the information can be accurate, but the science communication could be presented in a way which is not suitable for the audience or the context, or for example, like it happens on social media sometimes, unfortunately, also with experts, in an aggressive fashion or in aggressive style, and as we say, and that of course is for me is not a sign of very good quality. It's a sign that there is not much attention to the audience and the context, which for me, as a sociology, is just as equally important as the accurate content of the information. So I would certainly agree with that.
Yes, I mean, I guess what we're saying is that, like, that increasing quality, like looking at those characteristics that Massey, said, all those things go into quality, like beauty and accuracy thing and all that. I think, a piece of science communication, to be effective, is what we're saying, kind of has to have all of those things, or the more of those things it has, the better, the more effective it might be. This more we say it has style, but we can't necessarily go the other way and say, this thing isn't beautiful, so it's misinformation. I mean, some misinformation, people dress up as being very stylistic, so maybe they get bad science out, through not accuracy, but the other elements of style. Another question that Alba has is that, I'll just read this. So they say, I'm a person responsible for my institution's science communication activities, and I'm very interested in training our community to approach science communication more reflexively. Visual science communication is one of their interest, and she wants your recommendations on maybe workshop topics, or recommendations for brief workshops regarding this.
That she would be running, like with the researchers. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
From an artistic, I mean, what I always think is useful is in a lot. I don't know the nature of the research or the research project that you're on, Alba, but I think, with few exceptions, most scientific fields are, I think, inherently quite visual, and a lot of scientists may not think that they have any artistic ability, but from everything I've seen, that's not the case. Even just scribbling anything out, visualizing something is quite a powerful tool to thinking about the the science or the research in particular in a different way. So I always think an interesting workshop, at least to get things going, is to get people together and try to visualize their own research themselves. And then, collaboration brings something else, but the person who knows the research the best, just trying what visual tools they have at their disposal to try and come up with something. Maybe it would be useful to bring in kind of an artist to run that workshop as well, to provide some suggestions and prompts and that kind of thing. But it's quite fun, and just getting people to get out of that box of I'm not an artist or I can't draw, which I think is quite a powerful but destructive kind of instinct, is to think I can't draw, so I won't. But if they do, it will be surprising, kind of seeing what the outcomes are.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think well, in this case, and Lifeology works with a lot of artists who have science training, but we also work with a lot that don't. And I think to the point about reflexively, and just in terms of thinking about what the audience might bring to the table, is working with artists who don't have that science communication background. And I love doing that because they often see, visualize or see something within the text that I would not have seen. And just working collaboratively with someone who interprets the science or the information in a very different way, in this case visually, can be, in my opinion, just so empowering, and potentially make you see your science in a different way as well, and see what an audience might see in the value of that science, and not just you as a scientist.
Yeah, especially for something as simple as, say, jargon. If you're so immersed in kind of the field, it can become sometimes difficult to remember what someone doesn't know, or some misunderstanding. So even just the use of a word, or the over familiarity with certain visual examples. So if you're bringing somebody completely, an artist without the scientific background, she might think of a completely different visual way to represent that, outside of the sort of the scientific cliches of representing DNA in this way. They could think of a different metaphor, or even just a different way of drawing it more literally. But yeah.
Awesome. Jordan, we did have a question for you about what materials did you use for your illustrations, and how did you choose that style?
Yeah. Let me share my screen again with you. So here I have a little kind of timeline of from rough sketch to the finished illustration. And hopefully you can see that, right? I'm paranoid now that my screen's not sharing properly. Good, great. And those pens there are what I used for the actual drawings themselves. So I have all of the rough sketches here that I used to show Massimiliano and Paige to kind of work out some of our visual ideas. And then I would then render that out in physical form on paper in pen and ink. That's just my preference. I prefer to work in that way. You can totally do that digitally, and I'd probably save a lot of time, but I kind of like working with physical paper and pens. So I use I'm going to stop sharing my screen again, and hopefully you can see me. So I use a Pentel brush ink pen for quite a lot of things. You can make that very thick and very thin. It's a nice kind of brush end. And then just sort of technical pens, in this case, Staedtler pigment liners. And that's it. And then I scan that, put it into Photoshop, and color it digitally. So that's the finished product. And then just pick a limited color palette of a light and dark shade of up to 3 colors max, and that keeps it simple, and then keeps it visually consistent across the whole course. So, I think if we're dealing with about 30 illustrations in a flashcard course, it's nice to keep it visually cohesive throughout. And that was one way to ensure that.
Thanks, Jordan. Masi, we posted a paper in the chat on visual literacy, and I think this is really
Yes, and also the work of Felix Frankel. I think this is Felix Frankel is one of the leading science photographers in the world, and she published a beautiful book with MIT Press on how to represent the work of scientists, particularly through photography. And then on the social science side, of course, we find interesting the visual literacy. How do people deal with images related to science? What use do they make? One of the results of our study is that images, which as we know are a key ingredient today in social media, people do much better to recognize images than to for example, then responding to items about factual knowledge in as text. So definitely, and this is another confirmation of the importance of media like flashcard courses, that you can use images to attract attention and open a window of attention that hopefully then people can fill with or can use to explore further.
Yeah, do you have, I mean, just thinking about that though, like different levels of visual literacy, if there is such a thing. I mean, in choosing a style for a particular audience, do you think about the audience's visual literacy? I mean, I'm thinking in particular, like, you know, graphs and charts and their ability to like interpret what you've visualized. I don't know, yeah, maybe Jordan, if you think about that, but.
Well, so graphs and charts being the technical side of things, but I mean, a very recent example in the last Lifeology course I did on the infodemic, so misinformation, you know, during the COVID pandemic in particular. Kind of the other end of technical, I was questioning whether it would be prudent to do a play on a visual meme, like an internet meme. Because that using an image like that to make a point or to kind of use it for symbolic purposes relies on the readership being able to properly interpret that and understand, or at least get the reference enough that it's meaningful, right? So, you know, talking with Paige and the authors of the course, whether it firstly represents the point properly, but then also, you know, understanding the readership of who's looking at the courses. And that's going to play completely different for different crowds. You know, you might get uproarious laughter at a science conference with a funny bar graph that is saying, you know, doing something in an amusing way that is not going to land at all in a different audience. And they're both, you know, a kind of joke or a meme, but it does rely a lot. So yeah, I definitely think about that. And it's important that you do understand who the audience is. I worry sometimes you can get too sidetracked with wanting to pander to the audience. You don't want to pander. You want to just make sure that you're getting the points across you want, in my case, visually, but just being aware of that, always keeping it in mind, but doing it with your own style.
Awesome. Well, somehow we've up on an hour. I don't know how that happened. But thank you so much, Masi and Jordan, for this awesome webinar. Just I want to let you have, if you have any final points you want to make or things you want to say to the audience.
No, I hope those who haven't done the course yet, they can try and hopefully enjoy it and send their comments. And this definitely will help for new courses and new activities, Lifeology and us as authors.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and if people here are joining the webinar, thank you again for joining. If you have recommendations or requests for future webinars or Lifeology courses, maybe a request for Masi for future Lifeology courses, definitely let us know. You can email us or ping us in the Lifeology Slack. Awesome.
Yeah, so
Thank you so
thanks
much.
very much to Paige and Lifeology for inviting us. I've had a lot of
Yes,
fun.
yes, again, thank you.
Awesome. Well, have a
Thank
good
you.
day, or have a good evening for those of you who are wrapping up your
Bye-bye.
day.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.